All right, well, we've got the C6 competition drift build back in the shop today, and today is the day where we finally put some body panels on this thing. We've gotten through all of our initial testing, which we wanted to do without body panels for mechanical reasons, right? Without the body panels and the structure on it, it's a lot easier to spot and find problems, keep an eye on things, work on the car, etc. But two, I mean, it was gonna be hard to resist testing it in kind of dune buggy phase. I did want to see this thing drifting as it is, because this is hopefully the last time it'll look like this, at least in the sense that we're going to drive it. So I just had to do it. But now that that time is over, we've gone through the dyno, we've gone through our test drift day, everything seems to be happy and working well. It's time to close this thing up, put some panels on it, and see what it looks like as a complete car. I haven't seen it with the panels on it in a long time. Pretty much most of the build it has been like this. So I am really excited to see this thing go from a buggy to a complete car. Now that being said, we do have a lot of work in front of us, but it's gonna be worth the time. So that being said, I need to get to it. Dude, having a pocket tee is like all t-shirts should have pockets in them. I get so used to all these t-shirts that I wear that don't have pockets, and I forget when I'm wearing one of our shirts, either the Garage Built or the Jibber Jabber shirts, available on garagebuiltco.com if anyone's interested, that I have the pocket, and then I get used to the pocket, and then I'm wearing a shirt without a pocket. I need to just change my wardrobe, so every shirt I have has a pocket. Alright, we need to switch back to our new wheels, our TSWs. These are the borrowed Zafiro wheels that we had to use to get us by until we get the rest of our new wheels. Oh, that's a little too close. Still a little tight, but that's good. I just wanted to get these test fitted. Also, just a reminder on the merch, I gotta do it now. GarageBuiltCo.com, we have Garage Built pocket tees, we have Jibber Jabber pocket tees, we restocked all of them. We were pretty much sold out for a bit there, so we've got full new stock of those, and we've got a bunch of magnetic koozies. Where is mine? Magnetic koozies. These sold out pretty quick both times. So we got a restock of those. So if you're interested in some merch, help us support the channel, garagebuiltco.com. Got a bunch of stuff in stock, including like the LSRT, patina truck, yada yada. So check it out, see if it's up your alley or not. Yeah, so anyway, let me go get the other wheels so we can swap these. We got to test fit our over fenders and see where we're at with wheel specs. I'm hoping I got it right, but I did it just kind of off of rough measurements, not actually having this stuff here. So we'll find out. All right, well, here's what it looks like with somewhat of a body on it. Now, if you've been following this build for a long time, you might be curious why we're putting base model fenders on this car. If you recall, the original chassis we started this build with was a Z06, and it came with Z06 panels. Well, the Z06 panels were not enough. You can see how much these big 315s stick out on this thing. In the rear, this side even more so, because I need to pull a little camber out of it. And then the front here, we are gonna go a touch narrower on the wheel, but the overall offset outwards is gonna be about the same. So even the Z06 fenders, we're not gonna cut it. They're wider than this, but they're not that wide. So the reason we switched to base fenders is because we found a really slick wide body over fender kit that's designed around the base fenders. So now is gonna be the first time I ever even take this thing out of the box, and we're gonna see if it's wide enough for the kind of crazy setup we have. Huh, that's a clever one. Well, the over fenders are as nice as their shirts. We're in good shape. Nice shirt. trying to be patient and wait till I get them all unboxed to check how much width we got. I imagine we'll still poke a touch in the front, as most drift cars of this level do. It's just part of it. I mean, this thing's so wide now it doesn't even fit in my trailer. All right, let's see, moment of truth here. So these are from 945 Garage. So these are over fenders. I really like this setup. I spent a lot of time looking, and luckily a bunch of viewers recommended them to me. I didn't even know about them. But this is like pretty much exactly what I was looking for. That's pretty close in the front. That gets us just barely poking, which is perfect. I kind of like a little bit of poke as much as I don't want to admit it sometimes. It's like admitting you like poke on a diesel truck. So we gotta cut the bottom out, which is good because that'll give us even more clearance to our inside stuff. All right, so front's good, front's gonna work. Check the rear, it's on the side with too much positive camber. These are gonna save us a ton of weight too, because these stock panels are heavy. Oh geez Louise, dude. We are good. We are good. That's with the way too much positive camber. Our wheels fit. Oh man, that's gonna look so good. I'm gonna be able to dump this thing. We're not gonna dump it, it's gotta be functional. But I do wanna lower the rear. I wanna get a little reverse rake in it because right now, with how much bigger the sidewall of the rear tire is, it's kinda like a dragster. It bothers me. It bothers me. So, all right, we need to start figuring out where we need to cut these out, start cutting these out, get these fitted on. You know the drill, typical wide body stuff. Oh man, that's gonna look so good, dude, I can't wait. All right, let's get to work. So I started out by mocking the fender up and drawing a rough line of where I was gonna need to cut. Now I wanted to do this initially on the car to kind of see where our clearances were as we steered the car from lock to lock. There's just kind of weird places that you wouldn't really expect the wheel to hit until you actually turn it through the travel. And a lot of that is due to caster and caster trail. The wheel doesn't necessarily move like you might think it would just looking at it. So tried to get the gist of the clearances there and then started trimming to make the fender actually fit. So we've got these monstrous fender vents that we need to trim for and get clearance for those and get that to fit right. And it's just all about tweaking and modifying and tweaking and modifying. So every time I put the fender on, I'm trying to get it on where it's going to need to be with good door clearance and good door gaps, so we don't have the fender bound up as we go to attach the over fender onto it. So using clamps, going back and forth, trying to get this just right is tricky. You move one clamp, then you need to adjust it a little bit, and then you move the other clamp, and then that part's out of whack. So I spent a lot of time messing with this, and I'll be honest, this is not my forte, and it's not my favorite thing to do by any stretch of the imagination. I don't normally have the patience to sit there and get things like this perfect, but I'm really trying here to make sure that I don't rush it and end up disliking the end result. So test fit, test fit, test fit. So we get some holes drilled, basically some pilot holes, some clecos in there, and then start just working around and figuring out where our clearances are, and then go ahead and start drilling the rest of our holes. So we just need to drill a bunch of holes. We're going to use rivets. Now, I don't normally would attach this with riv nuts because I prefer being able to take it apart, but since the Corvette is a unique chassis and has removable fenders factory, obviously we're working on the fronts, which most cars have that, but even in the rear, there's no need for me to really be able to remove them easily because the over fender and the fender, I can remove it all as one unit. And I've come to like using rivets a lot more lately. I love using riv nuts for brackets and things like that, but for stuff like this, rivets are actually pretty nice, and it's real satisfying to do with the Milwaukee rivet tool. So we got the one side fitted up where we were happy with it. It was time to start fitting up the other side. I like doing things in pairs like this, so as opposed to jumping to the rear, doing both fronts together, because the other one's kind of fresh on your mind. We just did it, we know what we needed to cut, so I was able to just get most of it cut on the bench before even test fitting the fender, because it's going to be roughly the same as the other side. And then now we can do the fine trimming now that we've got the fender on the car and the gist of it cut out. So once we're happy with the fit up of the second fender, we can put a couple clecos in it, but I really need the clecos from the other side. I'd like to do it with all of the clecos and get it all perfect before I start slamming rivets in, because it's just harder to go back. So So what I do is I steal all the Quicos back, put them all on this side. I Quico the whole thing in. So every hole has a Quico, and then just take one out, put a rivet in. Take another out, put another rivet in. And the reason I do it that way is just to keep it from shifting around. Once you've got a few in, it's pretty well held in place, but you can get kind of bubbles, almost like a sticker, just trying to work it all the way around as opposed to just taking all of them out and only having a couple on the corners, and then you end up with it a little bit wonky. So that was just the way I wanted to do it on this one, taking my time. It definitely took a lot longer than doing it just with having, half the holes have Quicos, riveting the other half, pulling all the Quicos out, riveting the rest. That's definitely the way faster way to do it, but I wanted to be precise, especially on these fronts, because clearance is going to be really important, and these are really going to get beat up the most by the tire. When you're steering at full lock and you go through a big bump, when someone hits you, when you hit somebody, these are going to take a lot of abuse, so I wanted to make sure that they fit nice and clean and gave us all the clearance we wanted while still looking right and having, the right kind of wheel gap. We don't want any sort of monster truck gap, but we also don't want to be destroying these things every event. So it's a balance. It's a fine balance. All right, fronts are officially on. Really, really happy with how that looks, man. They're clean, they're simple, but they are super wide. I think we'll be right on the money once we go with our narrower front wheel. We might have a tiny bit of poke, but I'm okay with that. Like I said, I kind of like a little bit of front poke, but not that much. When half the wheel's sticking out, that's ugly to me. But when you got just a little bit of tire poking, it looks aggressive. Might just be one of those things that I've made myself like over the years because it's kind of inevitable if you want to get the most angle out of a drift car. Who knows? But yeah, it's kind of a side profile. Oh, they look good. I cannot wait to see this thing complete with the rears. It's already looking so much better. And the vents worked out really well for the fact that we've got these blowers here just to get good airflow in there. We won't have a bunch of hot air trapped. Same on this side. This side's probably even better, yeah. This is where the blower ended up. So what I want to do now, before we start putting the rears on and cutting those up, I do need to pull them off anyway to put some U-nuts in there. I forgot that we only had like 2 in this one side. We're gonna try to convert this to M6, see if that works. But I also wanna go ahead and drop the rear some, take the camber out of this side, and raise the front some. I wanna get this thing closer to kind of what I'm hoping for ride height wise before we start fitting up and mocking up the fenders, so we kind of know what we're working with. We'll see what we can do. So the reason why I wanted to do this kind of at the same time, this ride height adjustment, was one, again, so that we know roughly where it's going to be. It'll help us better mock up the fenders. But 2, it's a lot easier to get to the shock and all of our alignment adjustments without the quarter panels on, and we got to take them off anyway to change those U-nuts out. So it was kind of a 2 birds, 1 stone situation. We could get the quarter panels out of the way and get to our alignment stuff much more easily. So I decided to lower it pretty aggressive, about 1 inch. I usually undershoot it. I try not to lower it too much. I think it's going to be enough, and it's not enough. So lately I've been trying to go a little bit overboard, and usually it kind of pans out. So with that done, with the ride height adjustment done, we get the factory style U-nuts out. Since we only had 2 of these on the driver's side and I wasn't able to get the exact ones, we're going to be switching these to M6 U-nuts. So a U-nut is just basically what the name implies, a U-shaped deal that clips into a hole and then has a threaded boss. So now we're using M6 ones, which I just have way more hardware for M6 stuff than I do for the coarse thread screw type that the factory ones use. So the fact that we were able to get those to fit was a nice thing because it just minimizes the difference in hardware that we need to have around to work on this car if we need to replace anything. So with that done, the quarter panel's back on. With the new U-nuts, it's time to start mocking up the rear quarters. Now you can see the 945 garage. We put a little special note in there, which is a good reminder to get back to work. So we did just that. We got the driver's side rear quarter all cut up, cleaned up, and modified. There wasn't anywhere near as much to do to this one as there was the front. We basically just need to cut the wheel arch out because obviously if that wheel arch is still there, the overfender isn't going to do anything because the wheel can't travel upward. So we just wanted to cut it out enough for the wheel to travel up, but not so much that we're eliminating a lot of the structure. You know, that's really important here. We care more about structure than weight. We're not going to save a ton of weight cutting more of the structure out, and I want this to be durable. These underneath factory fenders are pretty strong, so I'm hoping if we leave a little bit of that structure there, everything will stay together a little bit more. It'll have a little more ability to flex and take the shock and the load of people running into us running into people, us running into walls, all of those things that tend to happen in a drift car. So we've got the driver's side mocked up. We went ahead and got the passenger side mocked up and then started final attaching the driver's side. So this one I went a little bit quicker on. I didn't do the same process as before. I basically put rivets in where there weren't clecos, then took all the clecos out and replaced those with rivets, and it's definitely a much faster process, but it is a little bit trickier to get all the rivet holes lined up. Even just taking a few clecos out, some of them you really had to fight to get the rivets in. So it's just kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, depending on how you want to do it, where you want to spend the time. But these really went significantly quicker than the front overall. So that made the whole process a little bit easier. Also, the Milwaukee electric rivet tool, dude, this thing, if not for anything else, the speed and whatever, it just makes it way more fun. I look forward to using rivets just to use the rivet tool. It's silly as that sounds. So one more thing I wanted to do to get a more complete look was go ahead and toss the roof back on. It's looking goofy, kind of half a car, half a not a car, so I want to get a better picture of what this thing looks like. All right, well, here is the Vette with some body panels finally, although multicolored. Really, really happy with the 945 garage fenders. I'm glad that a bunch of people recommended these to me because this is kind of perfect. This is my style. I don't like the big bolt-on flares that are way wider than they need to be, and then you're either sunk or running spacers. I wanted them to be just wide enough to cover what we needed to cover, but not so wide that we're literally running spacers just to fill in the gaps, and they are spot on. Like I said, front should be dialed once we get the narrower wheels. The rear swallows up this 315 like it's nothing, especially once all this is centered. But like pretty much perfect fitment back here for a functional drift car. Ride height wise, I'm happy with it. We're about even, maybe a little bit of rear rake. It should settle a bit more in the rear, so we'll have to drive it and see how it shakes out. It takes a while to fine tune ride height just because different spring rates settle different amounts. So, the front might only settle 1/4 inch, whereas the rear might settle 3/4 of an inch. So we got to fine tune that, but this is kind of what I'm going for. Maybe a touch lower in the rear, but this is a nice, it's looking good. I'm pumped on it. Swallows up that 315. We got room in the front, so we shouldn't demolish the fenders when we're going through from lock to lock, hitting bumps and stuff. It's pretty primo. So what we need to do now is build our rear structure. So we need to build mounts for the rear quarter panels and the rear bumper. This stuff is all mounted right now off of those bolts on the rocker. So as you can see, we can mess around a lot with this. So we need to make some sort of rear structure. It needs to be simple and easily replicatable so that if we get into the wall and bend a mount, we can easily replace it. But it does need to be sturdy. So it's gonna be a little bit of a challenge. To figure out where everything is square, I wanna go ahead and get the hatch on. That's really the last big piece back here that needs to go on, and everything kind of falls around that. So that's where we're gonna start. It's gonna be a whole lot more fiberglass cutting. This thing is ultra beefy for a stock car. We need to get the glass window out of it. I wanna cut as much of this as I can out of it. We're gonna replace that with a Lexan window, which I don't have yet, but we can at least get what we've got now out and shave some weight off this thing, because this thing's gotta be probably 60 pounds by itself, and we don't need any of that structure, so. Enough jibber jabber. Let's get to cutting. So this was one of those projects on the bodywork to-do list that I was absolutely dreading, trying to cut this hatch up and get this window out. So I drilled some access holes. Whenever you're sawzawing, jigsawing, if you're trying to get into a place that you don't have direct access to, you can drill a hole big enough to stick the blade in and then get your cut started there. So I start cutting all the way around the perimeter first. My goal is to get kind of this big structure and webbing out of the way and then see what we're working with as far as getting the window off. We just start cutting and hacking and cutting away. We don't really know what it looks like on the underside, so we're not sure exactly where we need to cut. And where I cut on this inside line was significantly thicker. And since we're using a body saw, it doesn't really have that much torque. If it gets bound up, if the blade gets caught up, it just stops and it's difficult to get started. So cutting through this was a struggle, and we made it all the way through the end, got the cuts connected, all to find out that it's still not going to come apart. We need to cut it up about an inch higher than where we had originally cut it, which it zoomed right through there, and we got this main piece off. So now we need to flip this thing over and start figuring out how to get the window out. So I took a Sawzall to the top. It's basically a panel bond window weld. I drilled some holes in it, took a Sawzall to the top, and got the top perimeter cut. But getting underneath, the problem is you really need to come from the inside, but the angle of the window, you can't fit a Sawzall in there. The body saw wasn't enough to do it. So I was fussing and fighting with this, and as I figured would probably happen, it didn't go well. So now that the glass was broken, which again was not at all unexpected, I was trying to avoid it, but I was expecting it to happen, especially with how aggressive I was being. We can just get on to getting this stuff the rest of the way out and cleaning up. I'll probably be cleaning up glass off this floor for weeks to come. I spent a while trying to get it all up, and yeah, there's still some there. But now we got to just get this last bit out, and it's still glued on or all the way around the perimeter. So we've got to take a Sawzall to it. Very sketchy. That's why we're using the full-blown safety goggles, not just glasses, because glass could fly at us from any direction. So we finally get that out. It was a struggle. It was a fight, but we got it done. We got the job done. We persevered. We moved on. So we had to cut these corners out. We know they're going to make contact with our expansion tank swirl pot deal. And now we can test fit the hatch back on the car. So this is a tedious process. You know, this being a race car and having so little structure in the back, you're trying to line stuff up that's not really lined up to anything else. So you don't have a lot to base it off of, but we've got the gist of where it needs to go. We've just got to kind of massage it and get it in the place that at least looks best with where everything else is. So we get the hatch in, we get it fitted up to where we've got a decent gap all the way around, and then we drilled our holes for the halo to bolt it in. We got the hatch bolted in, and then we tinkered with the gap on the quarter panels. So as they bolt into the bumper, that gap kind of sets the perimeter gap around the hatch. So trying to get all of that right was a challenge. All right, well, it was not easy. It was not easy, but we got everything fitting right. That's why this is not my usual type of project that I like doing, but everything's fitting right for the most part. Now we get to make some mounts. Shouldn't need much. The stuff all kind of ties itself together pretty well. One more project down off the chopping block. Now, obviously my intention was not to break the glass. I realized though that to save any of this slip and cut the glass out myself, it was a strong possibility that it was gonna break. Just one of those things, you know, a lot of people say, why didn't you get this tool for removing glass? Or why didn't you have a glass person remove it? Which I did think about when the glass guy installed the windshield. I just totally forgot to ask him to do this too. You know, one of those things. But I'm sure I speak for a lot of other people who make YouTube when I say this. When you have a set of plans of projects you want to get done, like I really wanted to get all of, or at least most of the body work done on this car, this episode, I can't afford to just shelve it for a week while I wait to get a tool or I wait for a glass guy to come. So, you know, you just got to make it work sometimes if you want to get the job done and keep rolling along. So, but really happy we managed to get our gaps right. Things were not fitting great at first, but just needed to tweak this attachment point here. And now we got a nice, it's a little tight here, but a nice clean gap. Pretty much all the way around. So that was a struggle. I had to trim for this guy here, but we knew to be cutting it out anyway. So I do need to get some plexiglass, obviously, to rivet in here. I wish I could have left more lip, but that should be enough to get the job done, hopefully. Definitely looks ugly right now with no plexiglass, but you know, it's one of those things, part of it. So yeah, we could either start on the front, getting the hood on, getting the wastegate trim rings on, getting our hood vents cut in. Probably a better idea because I'm already covered in fiberglass, but I really want to make the rear mounts. So I think I'm going to work on that. I'm going to try to get our rear mounting structure done. So let's see what we can come up with back here to mount these. I think I'm going to, right now, just try to shoot for support in this back corner of the quarter panel on each side, and then something for the lower portion of the bumper. But we'll see. Let's get in there and see what we can come up with. All right, rear mounts are done. They worked out really well. They're super sturdy. Really happy with how that turned out. That plan worked pretty well. Ideally, if we get in a hit, it'll slide the hose clamp. Worst case, we'll have spares of these ready to go. I did originally want to go to the frame rail because this is supposed to be my crush structure, but then I kind of came to the conclusion that if I'm getting into this all the way in here enough to damage it, this is already toast. So might as well mount it here. Easily replaceable. That's another reason why I went with the hose clamp idea, because if I were to weld this to this bar, then if one or the other got messed up, I would need a whole new unit, as opposed to if I just get into it enough to damage this, swap it out, and we're ready to go. So I'm pretty happy with that. I did think about putting more up here, but I mean, there's really not that much load on the quarter panel itself. You'd rather let it have some room to wiggle. And this really stiffens everything up back here. The only thing I'm not 100% sure on is if I want to keep the quarters kind of rigidly fixed to the bumper like this, or if I want to mount the bumper a little more independently and have it kind of break away. I'm not normally big on breakaway stuff, so I don't know. We'll think about that. As of right now, I'm kind of good with this. The bumper itself has some flex. If we get in enough for the bumper to tear this up, like I think we were going to tear this up anyway. That's kind of my thought. But finally, we have mount. This is one of those projects that's been on my to-do list for a while. I wasn't sure how I was going to do it, and I'm pretty happy with how it came out. Nice and simplistic. I still want to make some inner fenders in here. I still got stuff to do, but I think next we're going to dive into getting the front end together. So we still got a bit to do. But the body's coming together. I'll give you one more look at the old girl. Not as a go-kart skeleton, whatever you want to call it. Looking pretty good, coming together. All right, that being said, we are out of time for this episode, so I'm gonna go ahead and end it here. But I hope to see you guys next time. Let me know what you think of how the vet body is coming together. And for now, that's a wrap. So thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing, goodbye.